Okay, so the descent. We start the movie with some whitewater rafting. We see three women on a raft, and there is a man who turns out to be the husband of one of the women named Sarah, and also her daughter Jessica are both there watching. And so after the rafting, uh, Sarah and her husband and daughter are actually in a car accident, and her husband and daughter are both killed. And at the hospital, we see the one friend, Juno, is kind of keeping her distance while the other friend is comforting her. And we see Juno actually turn and leave. And we kind of fade out, and that's kind of the opening of the movie. And 1 year later, we are in the Appalachian Mountains in the USA, and six women gather at a cabin in the country. Sarah, who is our main character, and she's dealing with the grief still 1 year later of her husband and her child dying. And Beth, who seems to be her closest friend, who was one of the three women at the beginning of the movie, whitewater rafting. She seems to be the most supportive. They drive together to the cabin where everyone else is meeting. And Juno, I kind of get the impression Juno's kind of like the queen bee of this group. She seems to kind of be the unofficial boss, and she seems to be less of a good friend, perhaps. We're kind of getting that sense. And Beth even says she's a piece of work, and talks about the fact that she didn't really stick around after the accident last year. So yeah, there's definitely seems to be something there. Now, two of these women, Sam and Rebecca, weren't there last year. We didn't see them whitewater rafting, but they seem to be part of the group. They seem to be regulars. Sam apparently sent a letter to Sarah, which she was grateful for, about offering her condolences, and she apologized for not being there. She had midterm exams, and she's actually becoming a doctor. The sixth woman is new to the group, and her name is Holly. And I would describe her as a bit of a wild card or a troublemaker. And she's described as the protege of Juno, which maybe gives us a hint that she's being trained to be perhaps a queen bee, or somebody who's not necessarily a good friend. So they're apparently going spelunking, which for those who don't know is kind of the opposite of mountain climbing. Instead of going up, you go down, you go underground into caves. And in this case, they're going to a place that's supposed to be an easy cave to explore. They call it a level 2. And Holly, the protege of Juno, seems to think it will be boring. She talks about this book and how, they describe it. It's like a tourist place. It's not going to be very exciting. So they after a night of hanging out in the cabin, early in the morning, they drive their cars, and then they get out and they hike to the cave. But interestingly enough, Juno leaves the book about the cave in the car very pointedly. And when they arrive at the cave, it's a creepy hole in the ground. And one of them says something like, "You've got to be kidding," and it just looks like this very creepy hole, and it does not look like anything I would want to be climbing into. It certainly doesn't look like a tourist place to me. But once they go in, it turns out it's a much cooler cave than they thought. It's quite beautiful. It's amazing. There is some awkwardness between Juno and Sarah. And Juno actually apologizes for not sticking around after the accident the year before. And she says, "I'm here for you now." And, this is where we kind of see them starting to explore. And, it's actually quite suspenseful, and it's quite claustrophobic. And, they crawl through this little tunnel, and it sort of gets smaller and smaller. And someone comments that this is not how they pictured this from reading the book. And someone else says, "Oh, well, books don't always give you the right impression." And Sarah winds up getting stuck in this tunnel, and there's actually a bit of a collapse, and so the tunnel kind of closes behind them, so they now can't go back that way. And it's all very tense, and it's very suspenseful. And they talk about the book again, and somebody says, "Well, don't
All right,
worry."
time out. What are we doing? I thought we were going to comment on the movie. You're going through almost the entire movie. I'm going to forget what I think about like the first few scenes, but you're going through the whole movie. Like, are we supposed to talk about one part, then comment, another part, then comment? You've gone through so much of the movie, I can't even remember what happened at the beginning, and you haven't even stopped yet.
True. I was trying a different approach here. We're still in the first. We're still in the first third of the movie.
I have thoughts on like other things that have happened. I'm going to forget about everything else that have happened by the time you finish talking.
Fair enough. So
you've gone way too much in the other direction.
All right.
Like, is this guy going to summarize the entire movie and then say thoughts? The end. Thoughts? Then the credits roll. After the credits roll, the screen goes black. Your thoughts?
Yes. Well, we were getting very close to where I was going to stop, but
really, okay. Yes. I'll let you finish then.
Okay. So, the tunnel has collapsed. They can't go back that way, but somebody says, "Don't worry, the book says that there's 3 ways in and out of this cave. So we're okay, right?" And then, "Where's the book? We should consult the book." And Juno says, "Well, I didn't bring the book because it won't do any good." And basically the truth comes out. They are not in the Borum caves that they were actually supposed to be in. Juno has taken them to a different cave. And it's a cave that nobody has explored before. It's a brand new cave. And unfortunately, as somebody points out, that when you do this kind of thing, you always leave information so that people know where to find you. So you say, "Oh, we're going to the Borum caves," etc., etc. So when they don't come home, people are going to look for them at the Borum caves. They're not going to look for them here, because nobody knows they're here, and in fact, nobody knows where this is. It's an unknown cave. So basically, this is a bad situation. They're potentially trapped in a cave. Nobody knows where they are. Now, do you have any thoughts?
My God, you've gone through so much of the movie. God, I can't even remember what happened at the beginning now. It's been so long. Okay. So there is some subtlety in the movie, and it is implied that Juno's having a relationship with Sarah's husband. This is my second time watching the movie, but even I was surprised when watching this how quickly the husband gets killed. It's like there's just like he barely has any dialogue. I felt a little bit more setup, considering the whole basis of everything we're watching is this relationship, that there would have been a little bit more there. A little bit more scenes with the husbands, a little bit more scenes with Juno interacting with the husband, or Sarah interacting with her husband. It was so short. It was kind of surprising the second time around. The first time going into it, you don't know what to expect, so there aren't any expectations. But knowing that like this is the basis of their relationship, it was kind of disappointing this time around, seeing how short their interactions were. And then from there we get to the hospital stuff, and there you get kind of the sense that you can't trust everything that Sarah's seeing, because it was either intended to be shot stylized or show that Sarah's mind is a little bit warped in how she starts running out that hospital room. in that the corridors are empty, it's endless running, no one's there. It gets darker behind her as she runs. So it kind of establishes a little bit of what that twist ending is going to eventually give us with her perspective. And again, you're right. There are a lot of women that come into the movie eventually, and they try to do little things to like make you remember who these characters are. Like Sam is a doctor, and you know, Beth is the reliable friend. I think Beth is the reliable friend. And
Yes.
you know, you have Rebecca, and then Holly's the new person to the group. It is a lot of fun. There is some camaraderie there where they're all drinking and stuff like that. And they try to establish that, like, hey, Juno's like the athletic one, the leader, the pack leader, stuff like that. But I still felt a little short-handed with like how the characters were developed. And I'd like to let you cut in, but I just want to try to remember all my notes because you covered so much more than I thought you were going to cover. Yeah, so you already have them in the cave. All right, so yeah, they get there. I was gonna make a joke about you said it's a scary hole. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of bushes around that hole. You know, it could have used a little bit of trimming, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So that's kind of the analogy there, and that like a lot of the people who saw this movie that try to read more into it felt it was a movie about sex and sexuality and things like that. And you know, you have this dark, scary hole, and these women almost like sperm going into it, fertilizing it, and then out at the end comes one of them where it's like, you know, it's kind of like birth as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that whole dynamic. And then geez, I forgot where you left off, but I'll let you cut in because it was just, I'm a little bit flustered. Go ahead.
Yes. All right. Well, just to go back a bit, yeah, at the very beginning, there's a lot of subtlety, and I didn't even notice it watching it a second time. I actually went back and looked at it a third time, and yeah, there are glances between the husband and Juno, and Juno falls in the water. Somebody pushes her in the water, and the husband is the one who helps her out of the water, and it even looks like Sarah might be noticing these things. She's kind of looking over and seeing her husband helping Juno. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff there that's very subtle, and it doesn't mean much to us at that point. But over the course of the film, we kind of get more and more information about it. But you're right, it's very fast, and it's a 5-minute sequence, really, the opening of this film. And that's one of the jump scares, is the car accident when it happens. And it's so brutal what happens that it's quite shocking, and you don't quite see it coming. So it's very real. It's not like a cheap sort of cat jumping out of a closet. It's a very real moment that affects the movie, but it is an effective jump scare at the same time. So that's interesting, I think. Mm-hmm. But getting back to where we were, yes, they go into this cave and they wind up exploring, and they go through the passage that gets smaller and smaller. And then there's the collapse, and they're now trapped. And they find that Juno has been lying to them and has taken them to this brand new cave that nobody knows about. And so, in fact, they don't know if there's another way out. This may be the only way in and out, and it's now collapsed behind them. So there's a lot of tension there. And even the protege, Holly, is upset at Juno for this. So very interesting. Did you have any thoughts about that moment in particular?
Well, I thought when the cave started collapsing, the movie started getting good. Because prior to that, I really wasn't that into it. I remember liking it my first viewing. But as I've mentioned before on this podcast, for me, the ending of a movie is really what makes me know if I like it or not. A movie like The Brown Bunny, if it had a bad ending, I would have thought it was as bad as all the critics who kind of panned the movie did. But I thought the ending kind of gave everything meaning. And with this movie, the ending was kind of the last impression I got. And the ending is kind of why I like this movie. And then on my second viewing, I was like, maybe the ending kind of clouded my judgment, and this movie isn't very good at all. The setup with all the women, They weren't really developed that well. I didn't really care about any of them, honestly. The only thing I kind of cared about was that whole interesting dynamic with Juno and Sarah. But again, even with that, it wasn't really developed that well either. And that was the only interesting part. Um, and also when they got into the cave, it looked really fake. It's clearly green screen. So there was a lot of the first act that I didn't like. So for me, that cave collapse kind of started off kind of like the more interesting parts of the movie. And that's kind of where the movie starts getting good because it's more real world thrills and scares before you get to kind of like the supernatural over the top part of the stuff.
Yeah, I agree that, and not just the collapse, but the moments before the collapse where she's stuck in that passageway. And to me, that's very much a nightmare, getting stuck somewhere and not being able to go forward and not being able to go back. And to me, that's very scary and it's very suspenseful. And it is a very real thing that could happen to somebody. So, yeah, I mean, that's horror of a different kind. It's very realistic horror. And so that really worked for me. And then the collapse is kind of like, well, I guess it's part two of the horror because, okay, there's a collapse. And then part three is, oh, by the way, we're not in the caves that you think we're in, and there may not be another way out of here. So we've kind of got a three-step moment here where it's like, uh-oh, our characters are now in trouble. So there's a bit of discussion there, and Juno tries to explain that she wanted them to discover this new cave. She wanted this to be a big deal for them. And Beth says, come on, this was supposed to be good for Sarah. Do you have any idea what she's been through? Like, this is horrible, and she says, you don't have any idea because you couldn't get away fast enough, and sort of accusing her of being a bad friend again. And Juno says, we all lost something in that crash. So kind of a bit cryptic, but clearly there's something there, something unspoken. And then she kind of tells everybody that, we have to keep going. We just have to keep going and hope to find a way out, because if we stay here, we'll die. So they push on. And the next major problem that they come to is, I'm not sure if this is the right way to describe it, but it's kind of like a giant canyon with the tunnel they're in. Suddenly there's a huge cliff, there's a huge drop off, and they have to get across this chasm or this canyon to the other side. And so this is much like the other sequence where they're getting trapped in the small passage. This is now a different kind of thing where it's a huge open cavern, but they've got to get across it, and it's very difficult to do. And we watch them in an extended sequence as they try to work their way across. And of course, they don't have enough ropes to do the job because they lost half of their ropes in the collapse of the tunnel. So as one of the characters climbs across, she has to reuse some of the equipment. Or no, I guess it's after they're done, they have to kind of pick up the equipment as they go. So they can't just leave it there. They're going to need it. So they use it, and then they have to sort of take it out and bring it with them. So it makes it even more complicated. Anyway, it's, again, to me, this is another suspenseful sequence, which is, again, a very real kind of situation. It's not supernatural. It's just, this is a very physically difficult thing to do. It's very dangerous, and we're watching them do it. Did you have any thoughts on this moment?
Yeah, that line you're talking about when she said we all lost something in that crash, it felt kind of out of place for the movie, because up until now the movie was dealing with a lot of subtleties with that whole relationship, and that kind of stood out so much. It's like, wait a minute, where's that line coming from? It's obviously going to set off triggers, and it kind of like throws all that subtlety out the window with their relationship, because she lost her husband and her daughter. How did we all lose something, I felt that line was just, it was kind of like, it didn't really fit. It didn't make any sense for her to say that in the context of what was going on. And also, even in the context of the movie as a whole, it didn't really fit the tone of what they were trying to accomplish leading up to that point with the subtlety of the relationships.
Yeah,
As far as like, no, go ahead.
It seems odd for her to say it, because in a way she's kind of outing herself as, maybe having some secret here, because how else can you explain it? We all lost something. But what do you mean? Like, our friend is now traumatized, so we've lost our friend in a sense to this trauma. There's no way to, like, I mean, she's obviously hinting at the deeper truth, which we're going to get to, but in a way it's like, is she trying to get caught? Is she trying to bring this out into the open? Or why would you ever say that?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. The other thing I kind of noticed is, as this starts feeling more like a survival horror film, where all these things are going wrong in the cave and the women have to adjust, it kind of felt like I'm watching actors instead of like these actual like real characters that's getting me lost in the film, because the personalities, the look of the girls, the feel of like watching them, it didn't really line up with what they were doing. Like, I didn't like, when I picture like women that are going to go out and do something this dangerous, this death defying, these aren't the girls that I picture doing it. It's like the things that they're doing and they're trying to accomplish and they seem like they're supposed to be capable of, it doesn't line up with anything we've seen them do up until that point. We just seen them get drunk and complain, and they didn't want to get up early. The type of people that do stuff like this, they get up at the crack of dawn, they're doing calisthenics, they're like planning things out, they're like getting their compasses and all their stuff together. It almost made me think of a movie named Commando. No, not Commando, Predator. I got my Arnold Schwarzenegger's movies mixed up. Where it's like Predator, it started off as one movie, then turned into a horror movie right after. And this kind of reminded me that in a way, in the sense that it starts off as one thing and it's just kind of this survival movie, then suddenly it's this horror movie. And with Predator, they're going off in the jungle here, they're going off in a cave. But either way, you have these group of people who are trying to accomplish this thing, and then suddenly, like, it turns into something that they weren't expecting. But with Predator, there was a reason for why they could do what they're doing. And the personalities, the look of the characters made you feel that they could accomplish what they were doing. With this, that doesn't really line up properly. And I think it stands out even more the further the movie goes along. It's like, why can they do this? How can they do this? Why are they suddenly capable of doing all these things? Like, from them getting injured and barely reacting, like the one girl, Rebecca, gets her hand sliced open and barely, she acts like it's a paper cut. She doesn't even scream. She's like, owie. You look at her hand, it's like torn in half, and then you have Holly, her bones are like sticking out of her pants because her leg is broken so bad. And she's like, ooh, like, like that Peter Griffin meme when he's like holding his knee. It's like, you figure they'd freak out more, it just doesn't, certain things just don't line up properly with like these girls who just feel like 9 to 5, regular girls that are like going through all this stuff and their reactions, and it just doesn't line up properly to me.
Yeah. And that happens in this sequence, actually, that the hand gets cut. And that may be an important thing to note. And the other really important thing that happens in this sequence is, as the character is climbing across, she discovers a piece of climbing equipment already fastened to the ceiling of this cavern. So somebody else has been here before. And they discuss this after the fact, that they are not the first people to be here. And Juno points out that this equipment is like 100 years old, and if somebody actually made it out of here, we would know about this cave. So this could be a bad sign that people were in here before and nobody's ever heard of this cave. So kind of even making the situation seem more dire. And shortly
and again,
after
like,
this,
how just at looking at it would she know it's over 100 years old? Do like normal, like, you know, people like know stuff like that? Oh, this looks like it's 100 years old. You know, it's like,
Well, I think there's two ways to take it. One is that she's, basically, exaggerating for effect, like this is a really old piece of equipment that you would never find today if you went to the store. I mean, I'm assuming that they buy equipment, they've got equipment for this job. So it's like, oh, this is some old piece of equipment that, wouldn't be sold today. But yeah, I mean, maybe it is really, really ancient and maybe she does know. I don't know. But they also do find some cave paintings, which again suggests that people have been in here before. And the interesting thing about the cave painting is that it shows the mountain and it shows two entrances, one on either side. So this gives them hope that there may in fact be another way out here. So they continue on, and Holly rushes ahead because she thinks she sees daylight, and she falls into a hole, which is what you've been talking about. She breaks her leg, and it's quite bad. The bone is sticking out. And thankfully, we have somebody who's almost a doctor in the group. So she's attending to the wound, and people are helping. And while this is going on, Sarah hears something, and she kind of wanders off, and she spots what appears to be a creature in the distance. And we're about 52 minutes into the film now, so we're pretty deep into the movie, and this is really the first time that there's, a sense of, oh, I think there's something else in here with us. And she tries to tell the other people, but nobody believes her. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. There's a lot I like about this movie. I mean, there are a lot of things that I don't like, but one of the things I do like is that they wait for the creatures to be revealed. I like how late in the movie it happens. Honestly, I would prefer to just stay a survival movie, and it's just them trying to get out the cave. To me, that would have been more interesting. But I do like the fact that they held off as long as possible before getting the supernatural element of the movie involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think it works really well, and I do agree that they could have left it just as a survival movie, and it would have worked. It would have still been scary, suspenseful, but I do think bringing the creatures in does kick it up a notch, and it turns it into a full-blown horror film. So I'm okay with that. But they come to a chamber which is full of bones, and again, not a good sign. Like just clearly a lot of things are getting killed and eaten in here, and they don't know where to go. They don't know how to get out. There's several tunnels, and they can't figure out which one is the right one to take. And before they can do anything, one of these creatures attacks them, and we're now like 56 minutes in. And this is where chaos really erupts, and there's a whole lot of things going on. And one of the things that happens is Holly is killed, and Sarah falls into a hole and is knocked unconscious. Juno fights, and she manages to kill one of the creatures, but then she accidentally kills Beth, or at least chops her in the neck with her pickaxe. And as Beth collapses, she grabs onto Juno's pendant, which was hanging from her neck, and she kind of holds onto it. And she needs help, but Juno kind of backs away and kind of leaves her, does not give her help. Rebecca and Sam are lost. They don't know where the others are. They don't know where to go. They don't know how they're going to get out of here. And we kind of fade to black. And it seems like all of our characters are in a bad way at this point. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so the movie obviously does amp up a lot now that you have the monsters involved, and it becomes a true horror movie. Juno shows that she's a badass, but in terms of, I guess it was Beth that she killed or thought she killed.
Yes.
I mean, that's on Beth. I mean, you see, like, she's fighting these monsters, all this crazy stuff going on. You're just gonna quietly tap her on the back. It's like, come on, you know?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. You should probably be careful. Yes, that is a very good point. And it is a bit of a thing that you see in horror films where someone will accidentally stab one of their friends, thinking that it's the killer. So it's almost kind of a cliche, but I think it works fairly well here. And anyway, after the blackout, Sarah wakes up and she winds up using the camera that Holly had brought with her, and she can kind of see with the night vision on the camera, and she watches creatures eating Holly. And the creatures appear to be blind, and it appears that they use sound to locate their prey. So we're starting to kind of figure out what's going on here. Juno finds Sam and Rebecca and says she may know how to get out, but she refuses to leave without Sarah. So this is, finally some good friend instincts are kicking in here. She's, instead of just leaving Beth to die, she thinks, no, I can't leave without Sarah. I've gotta find her. And then Sarah finds Beth still alive. And Beth kind of tells her that Juno did this to me and she left me here. And by the way, this pendant here was given to her by your husband, Paul. She was having an affair with your dead husband. And then Beth asks Sarah to put her out of her misery, which Sarah does. And I have to say, that's something that I find very disturbing, that idea. Like, if my friend said to me, okay, kill me now, I don't know if I could do that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so obviously I mentioned the negative about having six main characters, all women, half of them are blondes. They're not really well developed. There's a lot of negativity with that. But there's also some positivity. So this is kind of some of the positivity. And I feel like all of these women have epic death scenes. They all have these really either interesting or cool looking or kind of like, thought-provoking kind of like ways they go out. And yeah, I mean, Beth, that's something you think about. Is like, would I want to be put out of my misery, or vice versa? Would I be willing to put a friend out of their misery like that? So, as much as Beth was underdeveloped as a character, half-baked, and she wasn't that interesting, her death scene was interesting. And, it was a good scene. It was a good scene. The only thing I thought was hilarious to me, this is the only time I kind of laughed out loud with the movie, is you have Beth there dying, like blood guzzling out of her neck. And you have Sarah's like, oh my God, you're dying. Oh my God. And then she hands her the pendant. And like she completely ignores her dead friend, and she's like fixated on this pendant, while her friend is like blood gushing out of her neck, and she's just like wiping the blood off the pendant, and like is so focused on it. It's just like, it was just kind of hilarious because they showed you this wide shot. Her complete focus is on like, oh my God, she slept with my husband. I'm dying. It's kind of like, it was just like a hilarious visual to me. So that was the one time in this movie I laughed, and I guess it was unintentionally.
Yeah. So, in pretty short order after this, both Rebecca and Sam get killed, and Juno is on her own again, and Juno and Sarah finally reunite. And Sarah asks about Beth, and Juno says, oh yeah, she saw her die, And Sarah doesn't really call her on the bluff here, because she knows the truth. So before anything else can happen, a bunch of creatures come in, and Juno and Sarah fight, and they massacre all these creatures. And then Sarah kind of shows Juno that she knows what happened to Beth. She knows the truth. She knows about her husband. She knows about the affair. And it kind of feels like a classic showdown now between these two characters. And Sarah winds up chopping Juno in the leg and kind of leaving her on the ground, surrounded by these creatures. Do you have anything to say about this before I?
Yeah, so I kind of compared it to Predator before. I'll compare it one more time in that there was a reason those guys can kill as well as they could. They were trained killers. There's no reason like they should be able to kill all these creatures. Like why are either these women so strong or these creatures so weak? These creatures can kill wild animals and physically drag them into this cave, and they're such good killers. Why can't they kill women? You know, why is it? Why do people say men should not hit women? Because women are as big, as strong. They don't have as much testosterone. So, but they can kill these creatures who like, have like these well-developed muscles that they can crawl on walls, and it just doesn't make sense why they were so easy to kill. But if you take that element out of it and you just, you go into the fantasy of the movie, there's a pretty cool scene when they go back to back and they start killing these creatures. I mean, it was like here you have survival of the fittest. The two badass women survive. They were separated. They meet back up. You have Sarah who's drenched in blood, like Carrie, and then you have Juno who's like Laura Croft, and here they are like taking these creatures out like action heroes. So if you take the disbelief part of it out of it and just look at it for a pure entertainment standpoint, I thought it was pretty cool that you have these two characters and that there's something there that eventually they're going to turn on each other. So the tension was good, the action was good, and things were really ramping up.
Yeah, I agree. Very visually exciting to watch. Very, very well done. But yeah, it's interesting. Often a movie would maybe claim that the characters used to be, maybe they were war veterans or something, so they've had a lot of experience. But there's nothing like that here. There's no explanation. So, yeah, you just have to sort of forget that and enjoy the action because it is very well done. So Sarah finally sees light and she crawls up out of the cave and onto the surface. She runs to the truck, one of the trucks, and drives off. And then she stops at the side of the road. She cries and she pukes. A truck goes by blaring its horn, which is another kind of a jump scare. And then Juno appears in the car beside Sarah. And then Sarah wakes up and she's back in the cave. And she has a vision of her child in the cave with her. And I think in a way she's kind of happy to be with her child there. And that's kind of how the movie ends. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so you did kind of gloss over one of the better parts of the movie in that Juno and Sarah are staring at each other. And it's kind of like that old joke or that old thing where it's like, all right, we're stuck in the woods and a bear is chasing us. We can't outrun the bear. And it's like, I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you. And that's kind of what happens. It's like they're stuck there. These creatures are after them. They can't outrun all the creatures. But Sarah decides, I don't have to outrun all the creatures. I just have to outrun Juno. And that's when she cuts her in the leg and basically leaves her bleeding out for the creatures to attack her while she can try to make her escape. And again, you have the visual of her bursting out of the cave. And if you get into the metaphors, it's kind of like birth, and the whole cave being a giant vagina, with the blood and the violence and the pain, and the birth comes out of it. So that whole analogy goes out there. And then you also have the double ending. So apparently the US ending ends with her in the car where it's plausible that she survived, and maybe she's just seeing visions of her friend Juno, or it could be that maybe she died in the crash and this is just some kind of like weird nightmare before she dies, or she died with her family, or maybe her family lived and she was the only one that died. Yeah, I feel there's a lot of possibilities you can go with the American version. I think overall they wanted less of a downer ending. I think that's why they had her survive, and then from that survival you can surmise whatever you want. from there if you want to read more into it. But the UK version and the version the director kind of wants to represent the film is a version where she's just trapped in the cave and she never escaped. It's kind of a dark ending. I think the original title of the movie was The Dark, but I think it works. I don't think it's realistic that she would have escaped. I think there's a lot in the cave that wasn't realistic, but her escaping would be another one of them. But overall, I thought the ending worked, and I thought the movie overall worked. Despite it being uneven, I'm judging it more so based on the type of movies we watch, which are great movies. But if you just judge this based on what it is, which is a low budget, it might have been an independent movie, it did really well considering where expectations were and what the end result was. It's an extremely successful movie. It's just that my expectations were a little bit higher because I knew I liked it going into it. And again, the type of movies we watch on this podcast are really high. So if I talk negative about it, it's because the standards are set pretty high. But based on what they were trying to achieve and what they had to work with, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, I like it quite a lot, actually. And yeah, I think it's a very effective film. I think it's very entertaining. And in terms of the ending, I know the director has commented that either way, it's kind of a negative ending. It's kind of a dark ending because even if she got out, she's still got, all the trauma of her dead husband, her dead child, and now all of her friends are dead. So is this really better for her to live on outside the cave as opposed to being stuck in the cave and kind of dying there? But kind of believing that her daughter's with her, having this hallucination that she's finally reunited with her daughter. Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, I've never seen the sequel, but I believe they actually pick up from where this one ends, and both Juno and Sarah are still alive, and they wind up going back.
I saw the sequel a long time ago, because obviously it's an old movie. I remember Juno, I think, was the main character. I don't remember anything about Sarah, though.
Yeah. Well, I think that they're both still alive, and so they pick up from that American ending, and yeah, I don't know. Like, it is far-fetched that they would make it out, and it kind of made sense to me when she woke up in the cave and it was just a dream or a fantasy that she had made it out, and she was still stuck in the cave. But either way, I think it could work as an ending, and either way, I like the movie. I enjoyed the movie, and yeah, I've seen it 2 or 3 times, and I think I'll watch it again at some point in the future because it's very entertaining.